Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service on this Sunday, May 14th, 2023. We have a lot to talk about this Sunday evening. River breakup is underway. We have snowmelt and ice jam flooding. It's been a dynamic breakup along the upper Yukon River as well as the central Kuskokwim River. We are especially watching areas now around Fort Yukon, Crooked Creek down to Aniak, and then also over upper Copper River Basin around Glen Allen. And then a red flag warning for very high fire danger has been issued for the central Alaska Range and the north side of that there into the Tanana Valley, not just this Sunday afternoon and evening, but again Monday afternoon and evening as a result of some very dry and warm conditions along with some pretty stiff southeast to south breeze. We have a big ridge of high pressure that's building across southwest Canada up into the Panhandle. It's going to push temperatures into the 60s and 70s, maybe even an isolated 80-degree reading possible before midweek is over with. Check out this aerial reconnaissance image from Saturday evening of the ice jam flooding around Circle on the upper Yukon River. This ice wave has worked its way downstream now past Fort Yukon, where at Fort Yukon they still have a flood watch in effect for ice jam flooding. So Circle as well as Eagle had suffered ice jam flooding damage, as well as Crooked Creek on the Kuskokwim River, and those three communities so far have been included in local state disaster declarations by the governor. Here are some images from Glen Allen this Sunday afternoon, water going over the highway and some flooding of low-lying areas there in Glen Allen, and we expect that snowmelt flooding to continue, especially through the Copper River Basin, as temperatures will be warming here in the week ahead. Quick check of images from around the FAA webcams this afternoon. Aniak, which is under a flood watch for ice jam flooding potential. Overcast skies, breezy. It's been difficult to get any good reconnaissance flights into the lower half of the Yukon River or the Kuskokwim River because of this front this weekend. It has caused the low ceilings, making flights not possible there. Klawak, on the other hand, has seen temperatures up around 70 degrees as of early afternoon. And as I mentioned, temperatures in the Panhandle, especially the south, could get well into the 70s here, maybe even flirt with 80 before midweek. We still have flood watches here in effect. I'll talk about those more in a moment. Wind advisory, Central Alaska Range, red flag warning there for the East Central Alaska Range on up into the north side of the Alaska Range and a portion of the Tanana River Valley. And then this broad area in the lighter grayish blue, this just indicates high water expected this week into next weekend as a result of significant snowmelt, and this is pretty much south side of the Brooks Range through the entire Yukon Valley on up through the Kuskokwim River basins, and I would also include any rivers here down along south central or into the Panhandle, because these warm temperatures are really going to melt off the snows even up into some of the higher elevations. Here's where we have flood watches in effect, upper Yukon, especially at Fort Yukon. We also include areas of the Tanana River near Fairbanks, and then the middle upper Kuskokwim River Basin. We still have flood warnings at Crooked Creek and a flood watch for Aniak as a result of ice jams, probably going to work their way downstream. So pay attention in these areas if you live along these particular river systems. And always be proactive. Move and safeguard property before high water and ice breakup occurs. Have extra food, batteries, medical supplies ready. Know your community safety plan and emergency shelter locations, and then stay out of the floodwaters and ice flows once they develop. Here is where fire danger will be highest on Monday, especially there just north of the Alaska Range up in the Tanana Valley and areas of the Yukon Flats, because we have warm, very dry and breezy conditions forecast. So on the weather map, two things on the satellite imagery: big high pressure southwest Canada building north and westward across the Panhandle early midweek. This frontal zone just kind of sits out over the western half of the mainland and along the west coast. Generally, we have low pressure across the Bering up into the Chukchi Sea and Arctic Ocean, and cooler temperatures. That pattern's going to hold through this week. Right now, this afternoon, high pressure over the northern Gulf, diminishing front that's pushed inland, but we have another one that'll be nudging up into it, and this low is going to lift up toward Etolan Strait and the Yukon Delta by the time we get into Tuesday. So as we go into later tonight and on Monday, not a whole lot of change. Warm temperatures out here over western Canada. Frontal boundary here along the west side of Alaska. High pressure, surface high pressure out over the Gulf, but we have warm high pressure aloft. It's the compressional warming from that mid and upper level high pressure that actually forms what we call a thermal trough or thermal low. And that's just an indication of some very warm temperatures that'll be there in western Canada and the Panhandle as we go into Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of this coming week. Lows tonight stay above freezing across the middle upper Yukon Valley, Panhandle, South Central. Temperatures could be around 70, 60s and near 70 areas of the central eastern interior, 60s and some lower 70s in through areas of the Panhandle. Tuesday morning lows again above freezing along the middle upper Yukon Valley and much of South Central and across the Panhandle. For Tuesday afternoon, once again, we have temperatures back up into the 60s to even lower 70s in east central areas, and I would expect 70s to be expanding there across central southern portions of the Panhandle. 6 to 10 day temperature outlook, May 20th through the 24th. A bit above normal across the Panhandle, then still a cooler than normal anomaly over the southwest. Precipitation-wise, precipitation may average a little above normal, especially across eastern areas from Anchorage up toward Fairbanks and Arctic Village to Northway. It is normally, May is normally the driest time of year in Alaska, so we're not anticipating any really big storms or soakings, but that's the trend that we're seeing, at least as we head toward the end of the month.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Let's take a look now at your aviation weather if you have a flight planned either on Monday or Tuesday. Starting out this Sunday, though, afternoon, we have low pressure that's going to be passing up north of St. Lawrence Island and developing further northeastward up through the Chukchi Sea and into the Arctic Ocean. Frontal system coming in through the west that's going to be in the process of just kind of remaining in that region, generally trough of low pressure with a secondary low developing just south of the Alaska Peninsula. That low will be lifting northward and pull back toward the Etolan Strait and the outer Yukon Delta as we get into late Monday night and early Tuesday morning. Otherwise, big ridge of high pressure here over southwest Canada. Ridge axis will build to the north and west up into the east central interior, allowing for much warmer temperatures, some 70s possible here across the Panhandle as we go through the early and middle part of the week. Now, as we go into Monday afternoon, we expect IFR conditions along areas of what was left of this frontal system up along the Brooks Range, areas of the North Slope, especially western Gulf on the Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula, also just southwest there of Kuskokwim Bay, a broad area of IFR conditions. Tuesday morning, with the nighttime cooling, we see the ceilings lower and the IFR conditions redeveloping along the Brooks Range and areas of the North Slope, also along much of the southwest from Norton Sound down through the lower Yukon, and along areas of the southwest coast from Kuskokwim into Bristol Bay. Also, western Gulf nudging up into Prince William Sound, the east side of the Kenai. And for Tuesday afternoon, we expect most of the IFR to be from the far eastern Arctic coast along the North Slope and spine of the Brooks Range, back down through the lower Chukchi Sea, western Seward Peninsula, and then southward through St. Lawrence, the lower Yukon Delta, Nunavik Island to just east of St. Paul. Meanwhile, VFR conditions across the Panhandle extending into the middle Yukon Valley because of this warm ridge of high pressure, which is only going to further accelerate the river breakup situation and increase the threat of snowmelt flooding and ice jam flooding. Anatuvik Pass IFR Monday, especially there westward. Same thing, Adigan Pass, generally IFR, especially from there westward. And then Lake Clark and Merrill, We're looking at MVFR conditions on Monday. Rainy pass on up through the central Alaska range at Windy Pass, generally MVFR conditions there. And for Isabel Pass, VFR becoming MVFR. Further east, though, toward the Elcan border, VFR conditions thanks to the influence of that mid and upper level ridge. Mentasta Pass there, VFR. Tanita Pass, also VFR conditions. And then Portage Pass, kind of a split. The eastern half and especially out through Prince William Sound, MVFR conditions, but VFR further west. And then across the northern panhandle at Chilcoot and White, VFR conditions, and we anticipate generally VFR conditions and warm conditions there across the panhandle Monday, Tuesday, in through the midweek. Freezing levels aloft, most notable with that warm dome of high pressure. Freezing levels rise up above 10,000 feet aloft there in the middle panhandle, as high as 14,000 feet once you get toward Vancouver Island. Coolest air is out here across the Bering Sea, the west side of the mainland. And then we find that in this area, just generally low pressure. So this is where the cooler, more unsettled weather will be, and lower ceilings here along areas of the western and northern mainland. For Monday, we expect icing potential. There could be some considerable moderate icing possible. Pretty high aloft, though, along the south side of the Alaska Peninsula, above 14,000 feet, above 10,000 feet around Bristol Bay. And as you get further north, north of the Yukon River, up toward, say, Norton Sound and eastern Seward Peninsula, above 8,000 feet to above 6,000 feet as you get around and north of the Brooks Range. Upper level jet stream winds are strongest here. We have the big high out towards southwest Canada, low pressure over the Bering, and that zone in between is where we find the jet core of 110 to 125 knots along the western mainland. 9,000 feet, 700 millibars, strongest winds aloft are over the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island. We bring that down to 3,000 feet, and we find the strongest winds around this secondary low that's going to be heading northward up toward Etolan Strait and the Yukon Delta as we get into late Monday night and Tuesday morning. This is going to translate to the greatest threat of isolated severe turbulence over areas of the southwest along and just west of the Alaska Range. And we expect a broad area of considerable moderate turbulence extending from areas of the Aleutians, but especially from the Alaska Peninsula on northward through the western areas and the central interior, all the way up to near and along the Arctic coast.
Here at the end of the Earth, it still feels like a place for raw exploration and adventure. It's vast in all directions and ground zero for some of the biggest questions we have about the climate. But when we decided to make a series about the frozen places on Earth, we knew there would be one hurdle we would need to jump over first. What is the cryosphere?
The what?
Ooh.
I have no idea.
While I'm aware of the cryosphere, I don't actually know what it is.
It has something to do with ice. All right, that's all I got.
How do you get people acquainted with the cryosphere when most of us don't even know what it is?
Hey, so here we are in Washington, D.C., standing on the roof of NASA headquarters. That's the Capitol building right behind me. And what headquarters does is kind of serve as the focal point to connect the dots.
That's Dr. Tom Wagner, NASA's cryospheric program scientist at headquarters. In short, Tom is responsible for making sure NASA knows what the current status of the cryosphere is.
The cryosphere is everything from the snow that falls by your house to the icy reaches of the Himalayas, to the big ice sheets of Antarctica all the way at the South Pole, and also the frozen ground of the Arctic, and even some of that frozen ground that's currently under the ocean.
If you had to break it down, you'd have a mix of sea ice, snow cover, permafrost, ice sheets, and glaciers.
Right now, our best predictions are that sea levels will rise anywhere from 1 to 3 feet within the next 100 years. 3 feet of sea level rise has the potential to displace about 100 million people, which is a lot of people that need to find new homes.
Our current reality places us at a near tipping point, and the cryosphere is playing a huge part in that delicate balance.
So one of the things people don't know about NASA is that we study the Earth, and we've been doing that since NASA's inception back in the 1950s. And we study the frozen part of the Earth in a variety of ways.
Missions like noaa, Airborne Snow Observatory, Oceans Melting Greenland, Operation Icebridge, Arctic Boreal Vulnerability Experiment, and countless other labs and individual researchers stand at the forefront of monitoring the cryosphere. But this year was a particularly big year.
3, 2, 1, and liftoff of Grace follow-on, continuing the legacy of the Grace mission of tracking the movement of water across our planet.
2 state-of-the-art satellite missions are being launched in a single year as part of a major attempt to understand Earth's frozen places. Our scientists are answering hard questions, sharing stories from the field, and giving their best predictions for what we can expect of a warming world. We're taking you with us as we follow NASA explorers on their journey to the frozen ends of the Earth as they study our rapidly changing world from satellites, planes, and boots on the ground.
What we can do really well from orbit is we can tell when a surface of land is covered in snow. What's tricky is, though, how thick is that snow? And it's even trickier how much water is in that snow.
What we think of snow depends a lot on where it falls. If you live in the eastern US, maybe it's fun. Or maybe it's just a pain.
But if you live in parts of the world where they depend on the water that's in the snow for a large fraction of their total water that they use for drinking, for agriculture, for industry, or for hydropower, the snow is a very important natural resource. For example, in the western part of the United States, 80 to 90% of their renewable water comes from snow.
Snow is one part of the cryosphere that many of us have actually encountered before, but it also plays a critical role in regulating the Earth's climate. Through decades of remote sensing, NASA has kept a close eye on the ebb and flow of snow cover.
We now have a 52-year record of snow cover in the Northern Hemisphere, and we can see changes in the extent of snow cover over the time period, particularly in the last few decades, where we can see that the snow cover has been retreating. It's been melting a lot earlier in the springtime.
The extent is relatively easy to do, and it has been done over the years. What's tricky is, though, how thick is that snow? And it's even trickier how much water is in that snow.
That tricky part is known as the snow-water equivalent, or how much water would actually be in a layer of snow if it melted. NASA and its partners have taken to the air to help solve this elusive mystery. First, there's the Airborne Snow Observatory, or ASO, a small plane outfitted with a couple of instruments, one of which measures snow depth using LiDAR. LiDAR measures distance using light from lasers. Since 2014, ASO has flown over basins in California and Colorado, taking before and after looks at snow depth. Scientists subtract the snow-free summer data from the snow-on winter data to get an idea of the snow depth. There's no single way to measure all types of snow across the globe, and so NASA's other airborne campaign, SnowX, is testing different combinations of sensors. This winter, SnowX will test a new instrument, the Snow Water Equivalent Synthetic Aperture Radar and Radiometer, or SWISAR.
SWISAR consists of two main components, one of them being the radar and the second one being the radiometer.
So with the radar providing the depth of the snow and the radiometer providing the density of the snow, we could put those two things together and get the snow water equivalent. Here in the chamber, we're going to measure different radiation patterns at our different frequencies and do some full system testing in this chamber. This chamber kind of enables us to isolate various types of radiation and interference. And in about a month, we're going to take the instrument, mount it on a Twin Otter in the Grand Mesa, Colorado, and we're going to fly it over the Grand Mesa and take various different measurements. This is what we call our engineering flight.
Making sure the sensors are calibrated is key in order to face the challenges nature will throw at them.
Half of the area that gets covered by snow every winter contains trees and forest. And the trees make it difficult for the sensors to see the snow that's underneath the trees, so it makes it difficult for us to measure how much snow there is. After the snow's had a chance to sit on the ground for a while, it gets denser and denser and denser over time, and it changes, which is another reason why snow is very challenging to remotely sense. It doesn't stay the same. It's constantly changing. One of the things that we often do in the field is go dig what we call a snow pit. We literally dig a pit in the snow so we can see all the different layers. The layering is very important.
All this digging is part of ground truthing SnowX, a way of matching up what the airborne instruments see and what is actually sitting on the surface. The ultimate goal of SnowX is to figure out what the best combination of instruments would be for a future satellite mission in order to get a global picture of snow.
We need to know how much snow is in a snowpack, because if we have too much snow and the snow melts too fast, then you can get flooding. And if you don't have enough snow, or if the snow melts too early, that can lead to a longer wildfire season, a more intense drought, and we need to know these things for water resource planning.
After we had a record that was about 15, 20 years long, we started noticing that the extent of the ice in the Arctic was getting smaller over time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back to the Marine Weather segment, and starting with the sea ice edge. Ice, we're seeing polynyas opening up even now along areas of the Arctic and northwest Arctic coast as we drop down through the Bering Strait. More in the way of openings, and we're going to see on Tuesday northeast to north gale force winds of 35 to 40 knots through the lower Chukchi Sea, Bering Strait, north side of St. Lawrence Island. This is going to cause ice to shift around across areas of the southwest coast, middle Bering Sea towards St. Matthew. We have the ice in place. It continues to melt off. Again, right now, winds, at least initially, have been southerly, but a low pressure is going to come up here toward Etolan Strait and just off of the lower Yukon Delta. So winds will become more northeasterly in the areas north of St. Matthew here by the time we get into Tuesday. For the nearshore waters for the southeast panhandle on Monday, winds northeast 10 knots there within Lynn Canal, upwards to 20 knots around Ketchikan, with waves 2 to as high as 4 feet. Outer coast, generally west to northwest winds 20 knots, waves 5 to 7 feet. On Tuesday, inner channels will see winds generally with some sort of southwest to northwest component, 10 to 15 knots, and waves again 2 to 3 feet. Outer coast, generally west to northwest winds 15 to 20 knots with waves of 4 to 6 feet within 15 nautical miles of shore. The northwestern Gulf and areas including Prince William Sound, east winds there 10 knots, waves 2 feet. Northeast winds 10 knots, upper Cook Inlet, but as you get down toward the entrance of Cook Inlet, southeast winds 25 to 30 knots, waves 7 to 9 feet. Winds fall off off across the region on Tuesday. Generally southerly winds in the 15 to near 20 knot range. Waves a couple of feet in Prince William Sound, and generally 4 feet at the entrance of Cook Inlet, and off of the Kenai, waves running 5 to 6 feet. Kodiak Island and much of the Alaska Peninsula on Monday will see southeasterly winds as high as 30 to 35 knot gales, especially the middle portion of the peninsula as a result of a front and low pressure that will be working its way back up toward the northwest. And waves on the Pacific side could be as high as 11, 12 feet off of Sandpoint and Chignik. On the Bering side, generally 4 to 5 feet, but as high as 8 feet northwest of Cold Bay. And then Tuesday, we expect southwest winds 15 to 20 knots. Kodiak Island more southerly through the middle portion of the peninsula at 20 to 25 knot winds, shifting west-southwest as you get out toward Cold Bay and False Pass. Waves will be running as high as 6 to 9 feet, at least along areas of the Pacific side, and 7 to 8 feet on the Bering side. The Aleutian chain, northwest winds 20 to 25 knots, generally speaking. Eastern Aleutians on Monday more westerly as you get through the central Aleutians. Waves will be running, say, 4 to as high as 8 feet just there north of Unalaska, and generally running 6 to 7 feet on the North Pacific side. And then on Tuesday, winds will be out of the northwest at 20 to 25 knots across much of the central eastern Aleutians, with waves anywhere from 5 to perhaps 9 feet there on the North Pacific side, and as high as 8 to 11 feet on the Bering side. Now, with an area of low pressure that's going to be coming up and working its way toward Nunavik Island, on the backside of it, winds are going to go northerly and start to increase, especially by Tuesday. 15 knots there out of Norton Sound off the Yukon Delta, 35 knot gales from the southeast there in Bristol Bay. And then on Tuesday, with that low getting in place here around Nunavik Island and then pushing up toward just off of, say, right in through Etolan Strait, we expect east winds, northeast winds, 25, 20 knots there, as high as 30 knots on the backside there out of the north at St. Matthew. And then as we go through the Arctic coast, winds will be generally south-southwest 20 knots on Monday. Northerly winds, though, down through the lower Chukchi Sea and the Bering Strait, picking up to 25 to 30 knots on the west side of the Seward Peninsula, Wales, on over toward Gambell, Savunga on the north side of St. Lawrence. And then on Tuesday, with low pressure further south of that area, winds will be out of the northeast at 15 to 20 knots along the Arctic coast, increasing to 35 to 40 knot gales through the lower Chukchi Sea, through the Bering Strait, and we can see northerly 40 knot gales there on the north side of St. Lawrence Island as we go through the day on Tuesday. Here's the low as of Monday, and on Tuesday it lifts further north, and we continue to see a frontal system here along the west side of the state. Warm high pressure behind me with temperatures rising up into the 60s and 70s across the Panhandle.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.